I'm sure if you're watching this, then you probably have played Pokemon at some point in your life. I have very nostalgic memories of playing Pokemon Sapphire or Emerald, a warm trip down memory lane. But I also have played Pokemon Sword a few years ago and honestly didn't have a great time with it. Some things were just missing. Then I scroll through on Steam and see a little game called Cassette Beast. So I hover over it and see, hey, that kind of reminds me of Pokemon. Then I watch a little trailer and realize that there's something special here. I'm Sam the Ashen, and this is Cassette Beast. Cassette Beast obviously has some things in common with Pokemon, but to be more specific, it's an open-world RPG monster collecting turn-based game. It's on Steam for $20 and has over 6,000 ratings, sitting at overwhelmingly positive, which usually means that there might be something special about this game. The style of the game is the first thing I noticed, feeling like a cozy, stylized world. You get to make your extremely charming character, and then you're off to the races. The story and characters are actually really good, but I want to talk about the gameplay first so you don't get too bored. The open world is pretty awesome. There's a bunch of small puzzles to complete and get a little loot chest for solving it. There's some bigger puzzles inside of dungeons that you find along the way, which add a lot of fun to the exploration of the game, while also making exploring rewarding, which we all know is a key part of what makes exploring fun. A beautiful world and an incentive to explore, this game has both. Besides the loot, there's plenty of awesome looking monsters to find and collect, with the more rare ones being in tougher areas or hidden in dungeons. There are things called bootleg tapes, which are basically the shiny version of monsters. I'm honestly pretty surprised of how original the monsters are in this game. Some of them might look a tad similar to other games, but the majority of the monsters look totally unique, and I have to give them props for that, because coming up with unique monsters and designs for them in a game that's already similar to Pokemon is not an easy feat. Palworld knows all about that. The combat is turn-based. You have your standard fight setup with action points and your health. There's also the whole fusion aspect. You can fuse any two monsters to create a totally unique monster once your fusion bar gets full. So if you fuse a Decibel and a Banshee, you will get a totally different creature than if you fused a Decibel and a Wingloom. It is a super cool feature. I'm surprised more games don't implement this. I'm sure it was a ton of work for the developers to create a unique creature for every single combination, and they did a fantastic job. At first, I thought that you could fuse any two creatures and keep them like that. Unfortunately, it ends once the battle is over, and then you have to refill your fusion bar again by fighting. It's a little bit of a bummer that you can't keep them like that the whole game, but is still an awesome feature. There's a pretty big variety of different moves, and they're all animated really well with some really cool designs. Another cool part is that you could catch a creature, take off all of its moves, and equip them to another monster in your party as long as the move fits. You couldn't put Fire Blast on a scuba diving dolphin or anything, but there's a lot of freedom here. The main progression of the game comes from leveling up and getting new abilities. You get new abilities by catching a monster with that certain ability. For example, I caught a moth monster and got the wing glide ability. I caught the scuba dolphin and got the swim ability. You get the idea. You catch these monsters by getting recording tapes and then using it in battle, increasing your chances if you damage the monster and avoid getting damaged yourself while you're trying to capture it. Once you do, then you can transform into that monster. So you're not actually catching the monsters themselves, you're catching recordings that allow you to change into them. It's a cool alternative that puts a spin on the normal monster catching formula. There's also archangels that act as bosses and a plot point. They are really cool and really well designed, and they're definitely interesting to me. There's also a little spin on the old defeating the gym bosses, which are defeating ranger captains, but they're unique enough to not be overdone or copycatish. For the story, you're on this island and you can't escape. You just woke up here. You meet the people in the town where you now lived. They rescued you, and with a few standout characters who eventually can become followers to travel with you on your adventures. I've mostly just had Kaylee as my follower, and her character is written pretty well, and some solid voice acting too when it's there. The dialogue isn't usually too cheesy and is actually written pretty realistically, which I always appreciate in games. You're not the mega hero to save the day, and your partner isn't an overpowered god or a down on their luck person in need. This also adds more immersion to feel like the characters could actually exist in a world, and for Kaylee, they do a pretty good job of making her morally gray, which is hard to do effectively. I don't want to spoil too much, but she's a really nice and helpful companion who also used to be an assistant to a pretty evil cult leader. It touches on manipulation, blind faith, mistakes, and forgiveness, albeit briefly, which still added some depth to her character. You have a pretty solid amount of dialogue choices, and most of them seem to be just for charm, but there might be some relationship status affecting choices too. That's right, you have relationship levels with your companions, and you can also end up either staying platonic, being romantic, and officially dating. It's a nice addition to the game, and it definitely helps build up the characters so that you actually feel some sort of attachment to the story. There's really only 3 main negatives that I've seen in the game, and you'll have to decide for yourself what these downsides might mean to you. The first one is that sprinting or using abilities in the overworld uses stamina, and the stamina bar is pretty short. It makes traveling sometimes annoying, especially if you've already been through a certain area and seen all the creatures already. This can be helped by either leveling up, which is pretty slow, using console commands to max out your stamina, or using mods. Up to you what you want to use and play with. The second is that there's no option to speed up battles or the animations in battles, which at first are awesome and not annoying at all, but after a while you don't want to see the same starting buffs and elemental effects every time you run into a creature. So yes, after a while for the regular fights it gets kind of tedious. There's mods that fix this and let you speed up the animations, but you'll have to get a feel for it yourself. The third is kind of minor, but I'll mention it anyways. Almost all the loot you get from chests, defeating enemies, or other people is always the same. It's pretty annoying, but nothing too bad. So overall, the game is definitely a gem, a dime a dozen. It's not a clone of Pokemon, it's probably the evolution of Pokemon that should have happened a long time ago but didn't. And luckily, Cassette stepped up to the plate and knocked it out of the park. If you like Pokemon at all, or any creature collecting games, or even games like Stardew Valley, then you will almost definitely have a blast with this game. It's pretty cheap, it's really well made, it's beautifully designed, and really well written and memorable and charming characters. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, leaving a like helps me out a lot. I'm interested in what you think, so let me know in the comments. If you want to see more from me, then subscribe to the channel. I post once every 2 weeks on Sunday, so I'll never clog up your feed. I hope you have a good one. Peace out.